Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, funding our roads and bridges, but first, expanding medical marijuana, guns, and abortion, as they say. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we got a ton of fascinating subjects to talk about, and some of them are very, very important and let's face it, controversial. Joining me to chat about some of them anyway is Marc Levy. He's with the Associated Press. Well, Marc, I'll tell you, all of a sudden there's a lot of legislation dealing with what? Guns, abortion, medical marijuana. It seems like, you know, here we are in June, and we're not talking about the budget so much right now, but we're talking about all of these subjects that, you know, have a lot of differences, you know, Republicans and Democrats, men and women, a lot of big differences on these subjects.
Yeah, we've really launched into a stretch of some hot button bills that are being advanced in the Republican-controlled legislature. As you said, guns, abortion. There's a medical marijuana bill that's bipartisan.
Yeah.
You know, we're also seeing some coronavirus legislation. So when they might prefer to be talking about the budget and sorting that out, they're really swamped with these things.
Well, let's talk about medical marijuana. A bill passed the House. It's on to the Senate. It expands, I'll put it this way, the availability of it and the usage.
So what we saw during the pandemic is the governor, using his disaster declaration powers, was suspending regulations for a number of industries and agencies just to help them operate. And so what we saw is that the medical marijuana industry was functioning with these suspended regulations. One is that a prescription now can last for 3 months instead of 1 month under the law. Another is that you can do curbside pickup instead of having to actually go in and purchase it. And so there's a number of other things, such as letting someone work in the industry if they have a misdemeanor conviction on their record. The law says that you can't work in the industry if you have any sort of conviction, but they're going to relax that to be just a felony conviction so that they have an easier time finding people to work in it. So these are things that are supported by both sides of the aisle. These are things that are supported by the industry and medical marijuana advocates.
And it's on to the Senate where it's expected to pass, correct?
I assume so, yeah. It was very bipartisan in the House. It may get some changes in the Senate because, you know, medical marijuana supporters are also trying to get other things into the bill.
Yeah, I think it had 164 votes when it passed. And by the way, in the polls that have been done, the support for medical marijuana is huge. I mean, we're not talking about a 10 or 15 or 20 point plus. You know, on the plus side, we're talking about huge. Well, recreational marijuana is popular in the state, but not nearly as much as medical marijuana, and that's sort of a done deal. I don't think there's any question about, you know, not continuing it. In fact, they're expanding it, as you point out.
Right.
All right, well, let's go to another important subject, and that is the topic of municipalities and what they can do in terms of enacting their own gun laws. Take it.
Yeah, so this is a long-running fight in the legislature with gun rights groups and gun owners saying that there's no way to force a municipality to repeal its gun rights ordinance, or sorry, its gun restrictions on its ordinances. And so the legislature has tried before to allow gun rights groups and gun owners to sue municipalities over these things, and essentially through the courts force them to repeal any gun restrictions they have on their books. This is a bill that the governor will veto, has threatened to veto before. It's passed the House, it's going to the Senate, and if the Senate passes it, it does not have veto-proof majorities in the Republican-controlled legislature to override the governor's veto. But it's, you know, this has gone on for years, and there's actually a case before the state Supreme Court that may change the precedent that would allow a wider variety of people to sue.
All right, I have a couple more questions on that before we move to the whole business of banning abortions. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, I'm chatting with Marc Levy with the Associated Press. At the moment, we're talking about gun restrictions on municipalities, and a bill passed the House that would dissuade municipalities from having their own gun control laws. So we have 2,500 municipalities in this state, and I guess the supporters of this say we can't have 2,500 different, not that we would, but, you know, feasibly you could. 2,500 what? Various ordinances dealing with a variety of laws that control weapons. It gets very complicated.
Yeah, Pennsylvania for decades has had a law in the books that prohibits municipalities from regulating firearms or ammunition. But in the last 15 years at least, you've seen a heavy pushback, particularly from Philadelphia, and city officials there also have a lawsuit pending in the courts that challenges that notion that they can't step up and regulate firearms to protect their citizens, the health and safety of their citizens. So that may be something that we need to watch in the coming years in the courts. Cases like that have been thrown out before in the courts.
Sure.
But, you know, we have a different era. This is a Democratic state Supreme Court, so we don't know what will happen.
And a Republican-controlled legislature,
That's right?
And a Democratic governor, so we got a mixture going on. All right, so let's talk about abortion. We don't need to talk about Roe v. Wade, establishing the legality of abortion, but in Pennsylvania, the House of Representatives passed a ban, if you will, on prenatal Down syndrome abortions. So talk about that.
This is a bill that the governor has vetoed before, and he will veto this bill as well, and the legislature does not have veto-proof majorities to override that. But it did pass the House, and in previous years, we've seen federal courts put these laws on hold when they're passed in other states. Without fail, they were put on hold when they were challenged. But that's changing with judges appointed by former President Trump. And so what we're seeing now is states pursuing a number of abortion restriction bills and laws to challenge case law and notions that the federal courts have been acting on for years. So there's another one that's pending in the House, it's what we call a heartbeat bill, or a heartbeat abortion ban. So there would be an abortion prohibition after the first detection of a heartbeat in an unborn child.
Right.
And so that could be as early as 6 weeks before many women know that they're even pregnant. But other states are farther along in passing these, but Pennsylvania is following in their footsteps, at least the Republican-controlled legislature.
Currently, Pennsylvania law allows an abortion up to 24 weeks for any reason, if I understand this correctly, for any reason,
except for the gender of the child.
For the gender of a child. And so there's nothing that will what we're talking about here doesn't interfere with that basic right, except it would exclude abortions for somebody with Down syndrome.
Right, and Democrats almost to a person have opposed this, and there's a variety of reasons, but we also see critics saying that this is virtually an unenforceable ban anyway. But like I said, it won't even have a chance to get to the courts in Pennsylvania. It'll be vetoed by the governor. But we are seeing federal courts now allowing these laws to go forward in other states.
Yeah, this is very fascinating when we have the budget coming up and we have a $7 billion surplus from federal monies. and they're going to debate how to spend that money. And it doesn't look like we're going to be talking about taxes, right? Income or sales tax or other, taxes on specific items in this year's budget, correct?
Yeah, and look, guns and abortion have been issues before with the Republican-controlled legislature, but they're going a step farther, and they're following national patterns. So there's another gun rights bill that's pending in the legislature that we haven't seen before, but it would be essentially permitless carry. So you could carry a loaded weapon in public concealed, but you wouldn't need a permit for it as you do now. And we've seen a lot of activity on that concept in other states as well.
All right,
so this is the kind of bill that we haven't seen action on before in the legislature. Yeah,
I want to thank you for the update. These are very, very important subjects. All right, coming up, there's a big debate nationally about various infrastructure bills. On the other hand, we also have that as an important issue in the state of Pennsylvania, and we're talking about roads and bridges among many different items that could be included in an infrastructure plan, and we'll get to that following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Crossstate Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, infrastructure, we're talking about roads, bridges, and a variety of other aspects dealing with transportation. There's a huge debate going on nationally. And we're going to chat about that with Bob Latham. He's the Executive Vice President of the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors and a frequent guest. Bob, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Good to be with you again, Terry, as always.
Yeah, well, let's start with the federal program. Sure. The Biden administration has recommended about $1.7, $1.8 trillion. The Republicans started out about $600 billion. They now it's climbed up to less than $1 trillion, and it's about the money, but it's also about what's included in infrastructure.
First of all, as they say, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. Soon it's going to be real money. But the important thing is to separate the infrastructure as it's being discussed in the media and at the national level, along with the transportation reauthorization bill. So we're going to try to separate the two. We'll take infrastructure first. So the president proposed $1.7 trillion for infrastructure. A very small portion of that was actually for roads and bridges. And the definition of infrastructure was expanded to mean, basically a policy statement by the White House.
Money for hospitals, daycare, right?
Just like people say, those are noble causes, but some of those things really, child care, funding for universities, to study transportation or study infrastructure, a little shaky in our mind. So let's separate that for a moment and then go back to the reauthorization or the authorization of the transportation legislation. They have different acronyms. It started with the Federal Aid Highway Act back in 1957, and that's how the interstate was built. Now we have public transit that receives about 20% of that. So we're looking at basically the surface transportation reauthorization, known as the FAST Act, and that comes due September 30th. Now, both the House and the Senate committees, authorizing committees, have issued bills kind of defining that going forward. And just to give you an idea, these are 5-year authorizations. On the House side, they're looking at $584 billion over 5 years. On the Senate side, more like 303, but that's just for roads only. The key point there is that both of those bills have significant increases in funding for roads and public transit going forward, and that's very important. The other key point is they're probably not going to be resolved until the end of September, so we're going to see any results of that will be next year.
But it's really been, it's not unusual for, the Republican-controlled Congress and a Democratic president to come to terms, but it seems to me they have really widely different views on what gets included in an infrastructure. It's not just the amount of money.
That's true.
With Democrats wanting to spend more than Republicans, but the other huge issue here is what's included, as you pointed out, and what should be excluded from the Biden plan.
Right, that's exactly right. I think that, going back away from the transportation bill that I just spoke of and back over to this infrastructure package, that's exactly what the Senate Republicans came back with. They came back with something on the order of $800 billion. But that, then you've got broadband, some water, sewer, and some things like that in there. And that is really what we would term traditional infrastructure. It's hard and fast assets that make the economy go, that make society go. The first society that got into infrastructure were the Romans. They built the water system, the aqueduct system, and then the Appian Way and the roads and all that. So that's what's traditional infrastructure.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to turn to Pennsylvania. We have a huge state. It's an old state. We got mountains, the Appalachians. We got a whole variety of how would I put this? Geographic terrain, I'll put it that way. And you know better than anyone the real needs in this state for roads and bridges, and we'll get to that following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, Bob Latham, before we get into the specifics, if you travel around Pennsylvania, I mean, we get this hugely diverse geography, I'll put it that way, and lots of pressure, if you will, and use and weather conditions that affect roads and bridges in this state.
Well, of course, we have a freeze-thaw cycle in our state here that is unique, that plays havoc on concrete and steel. We have terrain that requires us to have bridges along we've got 1,900 miles of interstate highway. We have 40,000 miles of state road, 70,000 miles of local road. That's a lot of pavement to keep up, and that freeze-thaw makes it very difficult. Now, what we have done, we passed a big transportation bill 8 years ago now, hard to believe. We fixed 3,000 of our 6,000 deficient bridges, so we've made a lot of strides. We've fixed a lot of pavement, but we have tremendous challenges now. COVID hurt us. We were spending about $2.5 billion a year to fix our roads. We only had 1.6 last year. That's a huge drop in the market. And we have some proposals for consideration in the state budget this year that could maybe move that up in the short term while we look at another long-term bill, sometime down the road.
Well, let's talk about the funding.
Sure.
And how much you think is necessary, and how do we get it, and the diverting of money to the state police. Not saying that the state police ought to be, they need to be funded, but the question is, how do they get funded? From what state source do they get funding?
Right. So we have the motor license fund, and that's your gas tax. We have the second highest gas tax in the country, about 58 cents a gallon. 11 cents a gallon of that, or almost 20%, is going into the state police budget, and that's happened over time. And I think everybody recognizes that the state police need to have their own dedicated funding source, not fighting with the highway system for money. So we have an opportunity here in the short term to use some of the American Rescue Plan funds. The state's getting $7.2 billion in additional money over the next 2 years. Revenue estimates are up tremendously. We're going to end this fiscal year on the general fund side with a surplus. We can use some of that rescue plan money to make sure that the state police are fully funded in the next couple of years, allow that money, the other money, to stay in the motor license fund, our gas tax money, the money we pay at the pump, to stay in the motor license fund so we can boost the program up to where it needs to be. When we finished Act 89, we were at about $2.5 billion. We're down like 1.6, now. So, moving it back up towards that 2.5 level we think is doable, and we'll have a lot of good results.
Well, tell me whether I'm right or wrong. The shifting of the money that historically went to roads and bridges to the state police came along because the legislature didn't want to raise taxes. We had a number of years with very tough budgets, so it's easier to take some of the money that historically went to roads and bridges and put it into the state police budget. You don't have to raise anybody's taxes.
Well, that's exactly right. That's what happened. It started with the Ridge administration, and then it went through, every subsequent administration through that. Every time we ran it, and it would bump along, and every time we ran into a problem in the general fund, it would spike up again because it was an easy source of money without having to take a tax vote. So. Now we have a surplus in the general fund. We also have money coming in from the federal government. We don't need to do that anymore, as a matter of fact. But now the transportation fund has a problem, so maybe we should solve that.
Well, what's the look, short term, maybe some of the $7 billion can be used for roads and bridges, but what's the long-term solution?
Well, the long-term solution is going to be a number of different things. Obviously, we're seeing more and more move away from fossil fuel and fossil fuel consumption-based tax is what we have now. So we're going to have to look at something on a more mileage-based situation, perhaps extensive use of tolling as the gas tax revenues decrease. That would be one. There is talk about a registration fee for electric vehicles since they're not paying the gas tax, as sort of a short-term measure as well.
We also have the price of gasoline going up, which is going to be, I think, not just controversial, but it could end up being an issue in campaigns in the state as it keeps rising and rising and rising. And now that we're moving out of the pandemic, you get my point.
Yes.
People are going to increase the driving. It's
important to note that the transportation bill known as Act 89 set the level of the gas tax at a static amount. It doesn't rise or fall with the price of gas. So when gasoline goes up, the revenue stays flat.
All right, well, listen, I want to make this point. We got a special airing of Pennsylvania Newsmakers on WGAL instead of Sunday at our usual time at 11:30. This week and this week alone, it will be on Saturday at 8:30. Saturday at 8:30 on WGAL. And guess what? We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers.